For 2 years, the loudest voices around Lionel Messi in Miami all sounded the same. He's finished. He's gone to a retirement league. This is a nice Hollywood ending, not serious football. At 38 years old, when most players have already hung up their boots or are playing testimonial matches, every arrogant pundit had the same script ready. Messi came to MLS to relax. Inter Miami were a marketing project. The level was too low to mean anything. And yet, on December 6, 2026, those same people had to sit and watch something they never believed would happen. Inter Miami 3-1 Vancouver Whitecaps. MLS Cup champions. Messi with 2 assists, running the final like a playmaker in his prime, dictating every phase, making it look easy, and David Beckham hugging him at full time, knowing a 12-year project had just been completed. This wasn't just a nice moment, this was the 48th trophy of Messi's career, extending his world record, breaking new ground. It was Inter Miami's first ever MLS title, and it was the night the retirement narrative finally collapsed under the weight of reality. Because this didn't come from vibes or marketing, this came from a full-scale football transformation, from the worst team in the league to a side-breaking records, smashing playoff opponents, beating Porto at the Club World Cup, and finishing the job by conquering MLS. This is not the story of a legend jogging around in Florida, collecting a paycheck while the sunset fades. This is the story of how, at nearly 39 years old, Lionel Andres Messi forced the entire world to admit they were wrong about him. This is the day Lionel Messi silenced arrogant pundits. Before Lionel Messi ever lifted a trophy in pink, most people had already decided what his Inter Miami chapter would be. In their minds, this wasn't a new peak, it was a soft landing, a long goodbye, a legend choosing Suns sponsorships, and a slow fade away from real pressure. Inter Miami's reality made that story easy to sell. This was not a sleeping giant waiting to be awakened, it was a club still learning how to walk. Founded in 2018, debuting in MLS in 2020, Miami's first years in the league were chaotic, constant coaching changes, uneven recruitment, no stable tactical identity, and long stretches where they were statistically one of the worst teams in Major League Soccer. They leaked goals, struggled to control games, and often looked more like a branding exercise than a serious football project. Then the greatest player of all time chose them. Not Barcelona, not a Champions League contender, not a Saudi super project. Inter Miami, bottom of the table Inter Miami. Instead of shifting the tone, it seemed to sharpen the arrogance. Pundits didn't talk about Messi joining a broken team to rebuild it. They talked about him joining a retirement league. The phrases were always the same. He's finished. This is where big names go to jog. It's a retirement home. Messi, Busquets, Alba, Suarez. This isn't elite football anymore. The setting made it too easy. Miami is sunshine, lifestyle, celebrity. Beckham is a global icon. MLS still carries a stigma with many European analysts who don't watch it closely. Put those ingredients together and you get one lazy conclusion. Messi came to relax. The problem bus is that the pitch kept telling a different story. From the moment he arrived, Messi treated Inter Miami like a live project, not a farewell tour. In his first months, he dragged a team that had been drowning at the bottom of the table to their first ever trophy, the league's cup, scoring in every round, rescuing games with late free kicks, and turning a struggling franchise into must-watch TV almost overnight. For most players, that alone would have rewritten the narrative. For Messi, it got shrugged off as nice, but it's just MLS. That pattern continued in his first full seasons. Even with injuries and national team duty limiting his minutes, his output was absurd for any age, let alone 36, 37, 38. He stacked 20-plus goals and double-digit assists, then followed it with another year where he flirted with 30 league goals and 20 assists across competitions. He won MLS MVP, led the league in total goal contributions, and transformed Miami from a punchline into a supporters' shield winner and the most feared attack in the league. Yet the criticism simply shifted shape. It stopped being "he's finished" and became "he's stat padding." The line was always some version of, yes, the numbers are crazy, but it's MLS. He wouldn't do this in Europe anymore. It doesn't mean anything for his legacy. To be fair, Inter Miami gave his critics ammunition. Under Gerardo Martino, they produced a historic 74-point regular season, broke records, finished top of the league race, and then collapsed in the very first round of the playoffs. A team that had looked untouchable over 34 games suddenly looked fragile when everything was on the line. Defensively, they fell apart. They lost a best-of-3 to a side they had finished miles above in the table, and all the old questions came back. Can this team defend? Can they handle pressure? Can Messi still drag a club through knockout football? The same thing happened in continental play. In the CONCACAF Champions Cup, Miami reached the semifinals and ran straight into Vancouver. Over 2 legs, the Whitecaps exposed their weak structure, pressed them into mistakes, and knocked them out with a 3-1 win in Florida. For anyone who already wanted to doubt, it was perfect material. The moment the level rises, they fall apart. Messi can't carry them like he used to. So the narrative hardened into something very specific. Messi was still a genius, but this was a lightweight chapter. Nice numbers, great highlights, but not serious in the way Barcelona or Argentina had been. His move to Miami was framed as proof that the elite phase of his career was over. That view ignored almost everything outside the MLS bubble. It ignored that he had just won a World Cup in 2022, leading Argentina through Qatar with one of the greatest individual tournaments of all time. It ignored that he added another Copa America in 2024, that he was still scoring in World Cup qualifiers, still stacking career totals that pushed him towards 900 goals and over 400 assists, still adding to a trophy count that no one in history has touched. But once people lock in a narrative, they rarely let it go easily. To many pundits, Inter Miami was always going to be the epilogue. Some free kicks, some pink shirts, some viral clips, and then the credits. Nothing he did there was supposed to change how seriously they spoke about him in his late 30s. That is the context you have to remember when we arrive in 2026, because by the time Messi walked into the MLS Cup final against the same Vancouver side that had humiliated Miami a year earlier, the situation on the ground had changed completely. Inter Miami were no longer a chaos club. They were no longer the worst team in the league. They were a structured, dangerous, experienced side built around his standards. The only thing that hadn't fully changed yet was how loudly some people were willing to admit it, and that gap between what Messi was actually doing in Miami and what the most arrogant voices were still saying about him is exactly why what happened in that final mattered so much. In the space of a few seasons, this club went from the bottom of MLS to a side that looks and plays like a reference point for the entire league. The turning point was simple. Once Messi walked in, standards changed. Training intensity, game preparation, decision-making in the final third, everything had to rise to his level. And it did. The first signs came quickly. That initial Leagues Cup run, where Miami were still near the foot of the MLS table, was not a fluke tournament. It was a warning. Messi treated it like a personal knockout campaign. Late free kicks, multi-goal games, constant involvement, 7 matches, 10 goals, plus assists, and a first ever trophy for a club that had been treated like a punchline only weeks earlier. From there, the transformation accelerated. Within 2 years, Inter Miami had climbed from the bottom to Supporters' Shield winners with a 74-point regular season, produced one of the highest goal totals MLS has ever seen across league and playoffs, reached consecutive postseasons, and their first MLS Cup final, become the first CONCACAF club to beat a UEFA team at a Club World Cup, defeating Porto with, of course, a Messi free kick in a 2-1 win. Those are not marketing milestones. Those are elite football metrics. At the center of all of it was a 38-year-old who was supposed to be slowing down. In one season alone, Messi delivered numbers that would look ridiculous for a forward in his mid-20s. Around 35 league goals, over 20 assists in MLS multiple braces, a hat trick, and games where he finished with 3 or more assists, double-digit goal contributions in a single playoff run, setting a new league standard across club and country in 2025. He was involved in roughly 75 goals in 55 matches for Inter Miami and Argentina. That is an output curve, not a decline, but the key detail is this: he wasn't doing it in isolation. Around him, Inter Miami built a squad that could execute his ideas at high speed. Luis Suarez, written off in Europe as finished, dropped a season with 17 goals and 17 assists, combining with Messi like the Barcelona days, but using timing and movement instead of raw pace.
Gant into Suarez, Messi, Campana turning, flicking, Suarez across, Messi!
Sergio Busquets controlled matches from deep dictating tempo as if the pitch belonged to him. Jordi Alba still attacked the left side with enough power to create and finish moves, arriving in the box to score, not just cross. Then came the next layer, Rodrigo De Paul adding work rate, steal, and creativity. Young players like Tadeo Allende, Matteo Silvetti, Baltazar Rodriguez, and others brought energy, pressing, and vertical running. This was not a testimonial squad, it was a balanced group with defined roles. Under Javier Mascherano, the structure became even clearer. Miami evolved from a star-reliant team into a side with a recognizable positional play approach in possession, clear pressing triggers out of possession, patterns that consistently freed Messi between the lines and runners beyond him, the ability to score 3 or more in big games without losing their identity. There were games that summed it up perfectly, a 6-2 win over New York Red Bulls where Miami scored almost at will and Messi finished with 5 assists and a goal, a 5-0 demolition of Orlando in the derby with Messi and Suarez both scoring twice, a 6-2 performance against New England where Messi came off the bench, scored a hat trick, and still had time to create another goal. Over a full regular season, they hit close to 80 goals. In combined league and playoff play, they approached the 100-goal mark, smashing yet another MLS benchmark. By the time 2026 rolled around, Inter Miami were not an experiment anymore. They were a complete, aggressive, high-scoring side with a clear identity, a proven core of winners, a young supporting cast growing fast, and a captain who at nearly 39 was still the best player on every pitch he stepped onto. They had already collected the league's cup. They had already lifted the supporters' shield. They had already made noise at a Club World Cup. The only thing missing, the one piece people kept pointing at, was the MLS Cup itself. By the time Inter Miami walked into the 2026 playoffs, they weren't just fighting for a trophy, they were fighting their own history. Because for all the progress, there were 2 big shadows hanging over this team that every critic loved to point at: the supporters' shield collapse and the Vancouver problem. That's the context Javier Mascherano walked into when he took over. He wasn't just Messi's old teammate, he was the man trusted to turn a highlight team into a winning machine. And his first decision was not about romance, it was about structure. Mascherano understood one simple truth: it wasn't the attack that would decide whether Miami finally became champions, it was the defense. So he built around the problem, not the star power. He tightened the back line, demanded better distances between lines, and made sure their rest defense was organized whenever Miami had the ball. The idea was clear: if you're going to play with Messi, Suarez, Alba, and creative midfielders on the pitch, the players behind them need to be disciplined enough to absorb pressure when attacks break down. The early months were rough. Miami went through another dip, a chaotic 4-3 loss to Dallas at home, a 4-1 beating in Minnesota, a 3-0 defeat to Orlando, heavy legs, shaky defending, and more talk of another late season implosion. They also crashed out of the Champions Cup against Vancouver again, which only made the doubts louder. It looked like the same movie was starting, and then gradually, everything shifted. The key moment in that shift came from a problem, not a plan: the Luis Suarez suspension in the playoffs after a clash with Andy Najjar. On paper, it was a disaster. You're about to play a decisive knockout match. You lose your veteran striker. For many teams, that's the trigger for panic. Miami did the opposite. Mascherano moved Messi into a freer, deeper role and trusted the legs around him. He started Tadeo Allende and 19-year-old Matteo Silvetti up front, with Baltazar Rodriguez buzzing through midfield. The front line went from clever but static to aggressive and vertical. Suddenly, Miami had pure running behind defenses, pressing from the front, and constant movement for Messi to connect with. The effect was immediate. Against Nashville in the decisive game of the series, Miami didn't just survive without Suarez. They destroyed them 4-0. Allende scored twice. Messi scored twice and added an assist. The team pressed higher, recovered the ball faster, and transitioned at a speed opponents simply couldn't live with. It wasn't a one-off. In the next rounds, Mascherano doubled down on the same idea. He resisted the temptation to throw Suarez straight back into the 11 and instead kept the young, energetic front three. Messi became the organizer and the finisher, dropping in to dictate the tempo and then arriving in the box at the right moment. In the Eastern Conference Final, they blew NYCFC away 5-1. Allende hit a hat trick. Silvetti scored again. Miami looked like a team that had finally balanced experience and youth. For the first time, it didn't feel like veterans plus passengers. It felt like a squad. Mascherano summed it up with one word in his press conferences: conviction. He kept saying it over and over. Conviction in the system. Conviction in the younger players. Conviction in the idea that the regular season and the playoffs are two different tournaments, and Miami had finally learned how to peak at the right moment. The numbers backed him up. Coming into the MLS Cup final, Inter Miami had scored 3 or more goals in 4 of their 5 playoff games. hit close to 100 goals combined between regular season and playoffs, turned what used to be a fragile defense into a unit that could bend under pressure without breaking Messi, for his part, was having the most complete MLS season of his time in the United States. Golden Boot, top assist provider, highest impact in the playoffs, hardly missing games, still deciding big matches with the same calm he showed at the Camp Nou and Lusail. That's what made the final so important. This wasn't just another chance at a trophy, it was a direct rematch against a club that had embarrassed them. The same badge that had once walked into Miami and left with a 3-1 win was now standing between them and the title Beckham had been chasing since 2013. And that is what brings us to Vancouver, to Miami, to a night where Beckham and Messi finally stood side by side with the trophy they built this entire project around. By the time MLS Cup night arrived at Chase Stadium in Fort Lauderdale, everything around Inter Miami felt different from the early chaos years. This was no longer the club that stumbled around at the bottom of the table. This was a team with a clear idea, a coach who had taken hard decisions, and a captain who at 38 was still the smartest player on any pitch he stepped onto. The opponent was familiar, Vancouver Whitecaps, the same club that had once punished Miami in continental competition, the same name critics used as a punchline when they said, if Miami can't get past Vancouver, how can we talk about them as anything special? On this night, there was nowhere to hide. 90 minutes, a trophy, and a chance to end that conversation for good. Miami started like a team that understood the weight of the occasion. Inside the opening 10 minutes, they were already in front. Tadeo Allende attacked the right flank and forced danger into the Vancouver box, and trying to deal with it, defender Edier Ocampo turned the ball into his own net. 1-0 Miami after just 8 minutes. It wasn't pretty, but it was exactly what a nervous final needed. An early strike to settle the home side and wake the stadium up fully. From there, the game shifted into something more familiar. Pressure, half chances, and risk management. Vancouver didn't fold. They grew into the match late in the first half and started to show why they were in the final in the first place. In the 38th minute, they produced their first real warning. A ball broke kindly in the box, and Emmanuel Savi found himself with a huge chance from close range. Rocco Rios Novo had to react instantly, spreading himself to make a crucial point-blank save. If that goes in, the entire tone of the night changes. Moments later, Thomas Muller almost leveled the game in a way that felt very on brand for his career. His header drifted just too high and landed on the roof of the net. Margins. Miami went into halftime ahead, but far from comfortable. After the interval, Vancouver came out with even more intent. They pushed higher, committed more men forward, and finally got what their pressure deserved. On the hour mark, the ball fell to Ali Ahmed at the edge of the box. His shot wasn't clean, more scuffed than struck, but in finals, technique isn't the only thing that matters. The ball squeezed under Rios' arm and over the line. 1-1. The away end erupted. The home crowd went quiet, and for a few minutes it felt like all of Miami's old problems were coming back. It nearly got worse. Just moments after the equalizer, Sabi almost produced one of the most dramatic goals in MLS Cup history. His shot crashed off one post, then the other, and his follow-up was deflected back onto the woodwork again. 3 times the frame of the goal saved Miami in one move. For Vancouver, it was agony. For Miami, it was a warning that the final could still slip away in seconds. That was the moment where experience, structure, and one man's vision made the difference. As the game opened up, Miami stopped panicking and started playing their football again. Busquets settled the tempo, DePaul in the midfield tightened the lines, and Messi moved into the spaces he loves, between Vancouver's midfield and defense, where one pass can flip a game. In the 71st minute, that's exactly what happened. Messi received the ball with his back to goal, just outside the block of defenders. Most players would recycle possession. He didn't. He waited half a second, saw a tiny channel between 2 Whitecaps, and slid a perfectly weighted through ball into the path of Rodrigo DePaul. DePaul timed his run, took it on the move, and finished calmly across the keeper into the far corner to 1 Inter Miami. A title-level assist in a title match from the player everyone said had come to slow down. From there, Vancouver had no choice but to step up. They pushed their fullbacks higher, committed midfielders forward, and threw bodies into the box. For Miami, the job was simple. Stay compact, stay disciplined, and wait for the chance to finish it on the break. The stadium felt it. Pink scarves waved. Every clearance was cheered. Every tackle got a roar. Miami had been here before, in big games and big moments, but this time there was a control to their suffering that wasn't there in earlier seasons. Then, deep into stoppage time, the final picture of the night arrived. A long ball dropped out of the Florida night sky and found Messi. He didn't snatch at it. He cushioned it on his chest and in one fluid movement, flicked it forward into space for Tadeo Allende to attack. Allende drove into the box one-on-one with the keeper and showed the kind of composure you expect from someone 10 years older. He rolled the ball through Yohei Takaoka's legs and into the net. 3-1. Game over. Title secured. It was the perfect summary of what this version of Inter Miami had become. A young runner finishing the move. A world-class assist from a 38-year-old who still sees things before everyone else. A full stadium watching a club they once doubted complete the climb. When the whistle finally went, the celebrations matched the journey. Beckham embraced Messi. Players collapsed to the turf. Pink smoke filled the air. This wasn't just another piece of silverware. It was a statement. Inter Miami had gone from the worst side in MLS to champions of the league. For Messi, it was trophy number 48 of his career. For Busquets and Alba, it was the perfect send-off into retirement. For Mascherano, it validated every tactical adjustment he had made. For Beckham, it was the end of a 12-year road that started with a clause in an LA Galaxy contract and ended with his own club on top of American football. And for the pundits who had spent years calling MLS a retirement league and Inter Miami a holiday project, it was something else. A final they could not dismiss with a joke. Because on the biggest night in the league, in a match that swung back and forth, the player they said was finished delivered 2 decisive assists, dictated the tempo in the key moments, and walked out with another major trophy. The storyline they had written for him, that Miami would be a soft, forgettable ending, didn't survive this game. From that night on, any conversation about Lionel Messi in the United States has to start with this reality. He didn't just turn up, he built, he carried, he transformed, and when it mattered most, he won.